want to introduce our fantastic guest for tonight. He is a game designer and a developer for console, mobile, and VR systems. He has worked for Sega, Namco, 3DO, Limbic, and Oculus on titles such as Rise to Honor, Dance Central 3, Rock Band 3, Wolf of the Battlefield Commando 3. Wow, that's a lot of threes. And one of my favorites, Zombie Gunship Survival. And if that weren't enough, he's also a teacher and board member of the Game Head School in Oakland, California, and the recipient of Excellence in Product Design from Black in Gaming. So please welcome a master of game design, Marcus Montgomery. Hooray! This is where there's thunderous applause. Woo! Ah! All right, well, excellent. So Marcus, it is so great to have you here. I'm super excited. But we, as you know, yeah, there's applause going on in the chat. Yeah, woo, clapping. We always start Masters of Game Design with an extremely hard question. Marcus Montgomery, what is your favorite game?
Oh, God. So I watched a few of these and I was like, oh, I have to have a good one. And then I started to write down what is my favorite game. And I wrote down like 6 things because so this is a question that, when you first get in the industry, especially when I was like in QA, we always ask this. And so I had to come up with what I thought was my answer. So I'll give you what my initial answer was all the time. And then I can talk about things that were in the initial, and it still kind of resonates with me today, is Flashback.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Because for me, that was one of the first games that really kind of sold me that games could tell an epic story. And, it felt like Running Man goes to like Mars and the jungles and all these other things. And I was like, this is amazing. Like I had no idea where the game was going. And then every time I thought we knew where I was going, it was something else. And so that was probably one of the ones that I think is most paramount. I think, after that, after you've been in the industry a while, you start thinking, who are the games and the creators that I really, really liked, and Treasure always popped up. Guardian Heroes, something I tested like a crap ton of, and Radiant Silver Gun, I think, is one of the greatest things ever. And
I'm a big Treasure fan. I'm a Gunstar hero man till death, right? That was
definitely Gunstar. And then you start thinking about other things that are more recent. Like Katamari was always up there. After I played that, I was like, my mind was blown when I first played the first one. And then more recently, like Horizon Zero Dawn, I think is really, really great. Like it's one of the few PlayStation games that I have a platinum trophy on because I just consumed it.
Right.
And then more recently, Spiritfarer.
I haven't played that. What is Spiritfarer?
Spiritfarer is a game. This is probably the most glib thing to say about it. It's a game about death.
Okay.
It's about you are essentially like Charon, taking spirits and helping them resolve their issues so that they can pass into the afterlife.
Nice.
And there is no death in the game, really. It's just you
are death.
Well, to a certain degree, yeah. And but it's somewhat of a farming, the emotional management sim. You go around and you give the spirits hugs to try and help raise their spirit, and then feed them their favorite food. And then you got to complete quests for them to kind of help them resolve their issues. And then you take them off to pass on to the next life.
That is wonderful. I'm going to definitely have to check that out because I have been a long time. I've wanted to see more compassion in games. I think that we've gotten the destruction part down really well. And yet there are so many other emotions and so many other types of stories that are yet to be told. And I love seeing what's going on in the indie game world and how they have been exploring these other emotions and ideas and points of view as well, right? It's important to see all those different types of creators out there making their own personal visions.
Yeah, I cannot recommend the game enough. I think it came to me because I've, just like you, there's certain things that have capitalized on the marketplace as great, and if it's about making some numbers go up and to the right so that you can get through the next mob, there's plenty of those things, but Spiritfarer, flies in the face of it. And I think it's important to give spaces to these sort of experiences.
Well, I'm adding it to my wish list right
Yep.
now. So awesome, some great recommendations. We'll probably hit on a couple of those other ones later on, I'm sure, because you've been involved with them. But before that, I want to go back in time. Let's travel back in time to when did you start playing games? Like, when did you first start playing games?
This is going to date me. First started playing games probably on the Atari. Like,
Okay.
like
2600, right?
2600, there's Space Invaders. And actually, this is probably a lie. It was probably even before that, like where I grew up in that town, there was a roller rink, and in there was an arcade machine. And I remember when Pac-Man dropped and everyone's life was like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing ever.
Yeah.
And so, it was the early arcade days, so I would think it's probably that. But I think the most earliest memory I have is when my dad brought home an Apple IIe. He was a teacher, and he was a math teacher, and he brought home one, and he's like, hey, there's these games, and popped in the floppy disk, and there was like Star Blazers, and you're like this little ship it was somewhat like Stargate, but you're trying to like drop bombs and ICBMs.
It was kind of like
things.
Scramble, right?
A little bit.
Yeah.
And that, and I think the other one was a Pac-Man rip called Taxman. Like,
Yep,
I remember that.
Yeah.
And then I think he had decathlon, Olympic decathlon.
Oh yeah.
Was one of those things.
Did you do the pencil trick on your keyboard? Right?
I had to, but my dad was he's a piano player, so he was just on it and just was able to do everything just fine on his own. So
yeah.
Those are the first things that I remember, like, as far as being able to play. Like, that was where I really got to get intimate with some experiences, and you just try and win. And I was terrible at it, but the idea that digital entertainment was the frontier was burned into me at that point.
Yeah, good for your dad though, for bringing it home and not just saying, "Here's Math Blaster," but here's some other games, right? I mean, not to say that Math Blaster isn't good, but there are definitely a wide spectrum, particularly if your parents are educators, right? You're like, a computer is for education, or in my parents' case, they were like, oh, we could do our taxes on it. And it's like, no, don't. That's a waste of time. We have games to play.
I mean, it was funny because I think at that time, like, it was very much, I think about it, it was very much entrenched into education at that point, because you had Oregon Trail. I remember us trying to, make those skiing games with ASCII art and all these things. So, when you're learning logo, just to kind of have better understanding of just programming. And so that was kind of exposed to me early. I even went to like some computer camps to try and learn how to work with the Apple IIe. It wasn't that great, but I made some things here and there, trying to make.
So that was your first experience making games, was at that camp, or was it at home?
It was at that camp. Like, I think that was the first time I actually was like, because everyone was like, hey, we're going to teach you how to do some basic text entry and like hello world. And I was like, nope, we're going to make a mud or something, right? Like, I just wanted text adventure. It was going to be, go north. Where do you want to go? Go west, pick up the key. And then I remember working on the art side of it, and I was able to actually render a dragon that animated within it as well. And it was a terrible thing, but it was something I spent a whole lot of time on, and I was so proud of it. And it was the only graphics in the entire text game that I had made, which is probably only like maybe 5 rooms, because it takes forever to code things in BASIC, like the original BASIC. Yeah.
That's good. So from those early beginnings, now you went to school, you went to college at Cornell to earn a degree in computer science. So it sounds like you were like, my dad brought home this computer, I'm now going to make things with it. I go to camp. That I assume, was that the reason why you went for a computer science degree?
Very much so. I remember in high school, and everyone's like, what are you going to do next? And I actually said this in a conversation with someone, that I want to make the next Nintendo. And I had considered going to engineering school, and I went to visit like the Milwaukee School of Engineering. And I remember the guy or some other people telling me like, yeah, we're going to teach your son how to write clearly, because that's what an engineer needs to do. Like, you just can't have scraggly handwriting. And my dad was
Oh,
all excited about it. And but then he started to kind of get me the idea that I might want a more well-rounded education, because if you go into, you know, engineering, it's like very tech
yeah,
focused. So I was like, and I think just being the person I was, like in high school, I was um, participated in sports, but I was also like in theater club and just some other things, that having a more liberal arts education was kind of in my mind.
right.
Um, uh, One of the other things that I chose the Cornell College, the
Oh, okay.
Ivy League of the Midwest, as it is. It has a unique educational program where you take one course at a time. So
Okay.
one course for 3.5 weeks, and then you get a 4-day break. And my father said, I know you. You have trouble juggling things. So how about we get you in a class or a structure that allows you to kind of focus on one thing? So I went there, and I knew I could get a computer science degree. And in my mind, I always wanted to do games, but I wasn't quite sure how. And I figured if I get a computer science degree, eventually this somehow will translate.
Right.
Um,
After all, compute, you can play games on computers. And so if you figure out how computers work, you conversely will be able to figure out how games work.
yes,
Makes sense?
if I had spent more time actually researching the school and what state their computer science program was in, I probably would have chose something different.
Right.
You know, like I came out of it with a degree that wasn't strong in any one language, but they touted it as, we're going to teach you the theory of programming languages so that you can
Hmm.
pick up any language, but you're not going to be well versed in any particular one.
Okay.
So when I got out, I didn't have like a really strong coding background, but it at least gave me a better understanding of just how things are structured, and
Right.
how to, like, you know, code. I know enough to be dangerous, I guess, is the best way to put it.
Well, I think probably maybe one of the things that it helped you with was how to communicate with eventually coders and software engineers and all that, right?
Very much so. Very much so.
Yeah. Which is an art in itself. I learned that was, for me, it was on the job training. I
Yeah.
realized that programmers think differently than other people sometimes, and it
Yes.
helps to be able to understand why they're saying the things they're saying. And it's not because they think you're an idiot, although maybe sometimes it is. But mostly it's because they're worried about other things that maybe us creative types are not as, hey, you can be creative making code. I'm not going to say that that's not the case, but game designer and programmer are definitely sometimes very far apart, sometimes right next to each other. Yeah.
Very much so. I think the one thing I learned about engineers is that efficiency is key.
Yeah.
And for some, it's more like, how lazy can I be? Um, Translation, how do I write this code so that I don't have to do as much work later?
Right.
And which is fair,
Yeah.
because engineers, there's gonna be more work later. And if you can have savings up front, it's just better for the project, right?
Yes.
So it's important to think about these things.
Students that I've had have heard me use the term lazy smart, which is you're just lazy enough to be smart enough to like know how much work you actually have to do in order to do something. But you're not going to be busting your hump in one direction, and you're not going to be dumb to be making mistakes, right? So it's like
Yeah.
there's this band of like, how lazy can I be but still be smart enough to do it right?
I
So
remember I had a programmer, my friend Peter Young, when we are working on one of our earlier games. He was like, I just spent the last 2 weeks, making this 6 lines of code into one, and I am so proud. And I was like, what? It was working before, right? He goes, no, but now it's one line. You don't understand. And I was like,
can't you see
more
the
power to
beauty,
you.
Marcus? The beauty of the
Yes.
perfection.
I was
Yeah,
like, yeah,
it's
do
interesting.
you?
It's an art that I unfortunately don't have, but definitely one I can appreciate.
Yep.
Yeah, elegance is always is always an appreciable thing, no matter what form it takes.
Very much so.
So was there anything when you were at that program, was there anything game related, or was that not even on the menu?
No, because I would talk to my professors and be like, look, I want to get into game development. And they'd say, well, maybe you should think about going to CES. And I had no idea what that was. But then the conversation would turn into, you know what? We're going to teach you Cobalt, and you can get a job at a bank. And I was like, word, I don't want to work at a bank. Like, this is not the end goal,
Right.
because and I'm in a school in the middle of Iowa. No one's really thinking about games at that point. It's not really a thing.
Right.
So, it was very much like, if I want to do this, I'm going to have to figure out a way to make it happen. And I wasn't expecting to get a lot of support from my professors at that time. And
Right.
as you do with most, not all professors, but you learn that not all of them are there to help you. They're there to help you realize how much to help yourself.
Right.
And that was the lesson that I took from that.
That's good. So you learned to help yourself. So then, so according to your resume, you found your way into the industry as a tester. Now, is this Sega? Was that the first place you tested it?
Yep, Sega was the first test. I had actually, my senior year in college, wrote Sega a letter and said, "Look, I want to get in. I don't care what.
Now, was
Give
this
me a job."
Sega in Japan or Sega in the US?
Sega in the US, in Redwood
Okay.
City.
Oh,
It
okay.
was in Redwood City at the time, so this is early. And sent it like probably March or May, and didn't think anything about it. Went home, started interviewing for bank coding jobs, and then maybe like 3 weeks of being home after graduating, I got a call to do an internship at Sega in their creative services department.
Right.
And creative services designs packaging. So
Oh, okay.
my job was to work with their, and then the SideQuest discs, which were super big. I think it was like 5 MB or something. I don't know, something. It was amazing. It held all this data, like whatever it was.
Right.
And from there, I impressed the people I was working with, and they said, if you want to get into test, which I kept saying, if my dream job would be just testing games, because I didn't know what I really wanted to do. I just wanted to get closer to games.
Right.
They said, all right, I know the person that works in the temp agency that hires. And then I got an opportunity to interview with the Sega test department, and I got hired as a temp. And then from there, I made my way into the industry.
Nice.
But Sega test was amazing. That was, I think, my real on the job instruction in what is good or bad game design indirectly, right?
Right. And you worked on some, if I'm not mistaken, you tested some pretty big titles at Sega. You tested Quake, and you tested Duke Nukem 3D.
Yes.
Yeah.
That those are kind of crazy, because they were not, direct ports, right? It was hard to make the Saturn. But I was looking at it the other day. Lobotomy, which was a company that made Power Slave, they made a really good 3D engine, so they got hired to do these ports. Right. And yeah, it was a lot of just trying to see what was similar to the previous map layouts and what wasn't. Right. And just trying to make sure that all the fun stuff and the charm was not lost, right? And hopefully keeping some level of a frame rate that was realistic, which was not on the powerhouse that was the Sega Saturn, which was not a real 3D machine. So
right. It was all hand waving for the 3D. But that said, I mean, that's interesting, because I never worked in test, but I have worked as a localizer. And so I think that there's a lot of commonality between the idea of, you're getting something, might as well be from another country, right? Like it might as well have been in another country, in another language. And here you're like, all right, we've got to take this very popular thing and preserve what is good about it. What were things that you looked for, like when you were trying to make this evaluation of what to keep and what might not work? What were some of the decisions that you had to make?
So, I was not a huge Quake player, but I understood it, clinically. So a lot of the cases, you're finding, it ranges the gambit between stuff that's game breaking, crashes, right, to glitches, which is like, inverted textures or something. But then there was, you'd have conversations with other testers and they'd be like, look, this doesn't feel right. The physics on this isn't right. I can't, rocket jump off of this, or the grenades don't have the same sort of impact. I should be able to make this leap. So you start looking for things like that. And as a tester, you only have so much influence depending on what the project is or how close you are to the developer. And so you write up things that, there's either like stuff that's completely bugs, but then you can also write up feedback and say, this does not match what we understand to be the quality of the product or what we expect to be the experience. And so, at that point, you're being much more of a critical analysis and throwing things over the fence and hoping that some developer reads it and goes, yes, we agree, and we'll change it. Some cases it was, you're a little bit closer to that. And other times it was just CYA, a tester's job is not to fix the game. A tester's job is to find all the problems so that the developer can decide whether or not they want to fix them.
Right,
So,
whether it's a bug or a feature.
Yes, you tell me what it is. Is this staying or is it not? Like, I don't care what
was this on purpose? We don't know. We're thinking it might not be, but maybe it is. So, so in that early days with Sega and those developers, was there any sort of embedding, or like, did you ever have an opportunity to go directly to the developer and say, look, what is your intention? What is the, so that way you, like you said, rather than throwing it over the fence, you were actually in the room with the people that were making it, so you could understand why they were doing the things they were doing.
Typically, no. I'm not saying that there weren't some times that you would go with the developers, but usually, seeing that we were a first party and we're kind of like last line of defense, in a lot of cases, your best voice was to talk to the producer.
Right.
And the producers would come down all the time and be like, you just crashed the game. Show me this. I don't believe you. And you're like, great. Here's the tape. Reproduce it. So then, all right, we're going to play through. Here's that problem. You tell me whether or not it's an issue or not. And there was a couple times, and you don't always have that. And it varied because sometimes we had things that were from SOJ or Sega Japan, where you would have almost no input, because by the time it got to us, it already gone through their QA, or they were like, this is good. We're not changing anything. This is what it's going to be. I remember finding a crash in Sonic 2 when we were doing like a Saturn compilation. And I was like, oh my God, this is a crash. This is really bad. And they said, you know what? If it's in the original Genesis version, we're not fixing it. And so I went and reproduced it on the Genesis version, and it didn't crash the Genesis. It reset the Genesis.
Oh. Wow.
And so they're like, yep, it's, this is pixel perfect. It works the exact same way, like let it ride. So no, not all the time were you embedded, but there were times where you'd have, a bit more feedback directly with the developers. And I remember we were working with, like, I think Scud the Disposal Assassin game.
Oh yeah.
You got to see how that one would develop over time, and the producer was really big on it and really wanted to make it happen. And when bugs would come in, you'd be like, this isn't good, you need to fix this. And they may or may not respond.
No. Yeah. Well, so let me ask you, what do you feel are really important skills for a tester to have? Like, testing is still a very valid job position, and maybe even more important nowadays than ever before, because I think that I myself am a little, I don't like the patch mentality of game development. And I know that it's probably a bit of a lifesaver in some cases. But having grown up in the day where it was either burned to card or burned to disk, you knew that if a bug came in and it never got addressed, for me as a developer, it was embarrassing, right? Like you let this, that Sonic bug I would have been ashamed to have had a game resetting bug in one of my games. So as a tester, what are the skills that, like, if somebody wants to get into that, what do they look at? What kind of thing would you look for? Or what kind of personality do you need to have?
I think you need to really love playing games, but you also need to be able to, there's a level of tenacity that goes into game development, right? Or at least testing, because you're going to be playing the same game day in, day out, doing the same thing over and over again. And there's certain things that are in the test plan, like test every weapon, jump in every hole, walk in every wall. And those are the sort of things. But at the same time, the best thing that you being QA is that you have a perspective that the developers don't. And you're willing to do the things that they would not consider, right? Like, we would, on Sega Rally, drive backwards on the track for like, hours, right? Because that's what you need to do. You'd reverse on the track, like, and you wouldn't think of these things. And I've even been a culprit of this myself, just even designing my own stuff. I don't want to test it thoroughly. Like I tend to test it in one way, and you might try it another way but you're fearful because if it breaks, you're gonna have to fix it. So having somebody to kind of come in and be like, yes, this is a problem, Mary. So I think the key thing for being in test is one, being willing to be tenacious, two, being very observant, and three, being inquisitive enough to, when a problem happens, dig into how to reproduce it, right? And that's the thing that's really, really hard for some people. I think it's really just having that analytical mind to figure out what are the steps to reproduce a problem.
Right. And then I would assume there's also a high level of communication that is involved as well, right? Learning how to write properly and explain something in a way that people who might not be in the room with you, like if I get a test report and, how do I reproduce this for myself,
Yeah, Sega had a very stringent bug writing process. And I think it was called bug speak. And then when you wrote your bug, there was a set of people who knew how to redline your bug, who would go through and be like, this isn't written up to spec. You need to write it in this particular thing. And you had to go back and update your writing. And the better you got at it, the more you move into redlining and redlining other people's bugs. So the structure was somewhat unique, and I kept using it even as I went into professional development, because it's just how my brain thought after being trained on it for so long. But the reason they'd done it is because a lot of the bugs had to go over to Sega Japan, and when it's translated, if it wasn't in a particular structure, it wouldn't be translated very well. So there was a structure to it that you had to adhere to.
Interesting. So when you were at Sega and you tested all these games, lots of games for these different systems, what was your favorite game? What was the one that never got old?
It was Guardian Heroes.
Guardian Heroes,
hands down, because that was the trash talking game in-house, because one, there was a head-to-head mode that had 6 people in it, and when you had 6-player day, it was just madness. And we'd be in a room together and people would be talking a lot of trash. I think it was Guardian Heroes because it was the most communal, I think, and that was fun. Virtua Fighter was good because it was always like head-to-head, but you'd have people talking trash. It was kind of one-on-one. But I think for me, Guardian Heroes hands down was kind of like the one that it was just madness, complete madness. Well, I actually, when I toasted or when I was coaching, I would bring that game out and have when I was coaching in wrestling, have all the kids come over and play it, and they'd play it for hours. I was like, yes, this is a game you need to know about.
You had a bond over this game.
Yeah.
So, testing is for many, or at least for, younger kids or students are, they think that that's kind of the dream job, playing, games all day. It reminds me of that Far Side comic strip, right? Where it's like, get paid to rescue the princess. Did your parents, I mean, maybe probably your dad did, but did your parents, like, at that stage kind of understand, that yes, there is a career at playing for, you say, well, what do you do? I play games all day. Did they kind of go, yeah, that, my son is on his career path, or did they kind of go, really, you're playing games all day?
I think there's a little of that, but it was somewhat unsaid. My parents were very supportive, and more than likely they're supportive in a way that was like, we're not going to say that this is a terrible idea. We're going to let this run. And and I think that was what I needed, and I wasn't making a whole lot of money, but I was making enough to be able to fly home once a year. And one thing that happened was when I moved out to California to make my way into video games, my mother gave me some seed cash to kind of make the move, and I haven't asked her for money since. So I think in that respect, they see it as a success.
Nice. Well, yeah, good job, Marcus's parents. So after Sega, you moved on to Namco. Is that correct?
Right? That is correct.
And that is where we met. Yay.
That is where we met. Yeah.
So the one thing that I really liked about how we did things at Namco was that the QA department you guys were kind of right there. Like it wasn't like you were, the developer was in another place. I mean, sure I'm sure you did a lot of testing on the Japanese games, right? Like Klonoa, and what
Yep.
were some of the other Namco games you
Tekken
worked on?
3, Point Blank, Tales of Destiny. I think those were
Right.
the ones that I worked on when I was there.
But you also did some work for, didn't you do Pac-Man World?
You know what? You were beginning Pac-Man World,
Right.
and I think you were early and not early enough for us to do any sort of testing on it,
Right.
and I wanted to help out on that. And I think there was even threats at some point where they were saying, hey, we should bring in Marcus to be like a game designer or to help out on this. And at that time, somehow they were like, no, we need Marcus to help out on Tekken.
Right. Yeah.
So it didn't happen. And
That
then
that might have even been during Ghost Zone days rather than Pac-Man World.
no, because I think Ghost Zone was before that. Like I
Yeah,
think,
it was.
yeah, so the one thing about Namco had a twofer. Like you had a QA department that also doubled as the customer support.
Right.
So we'd have to field all these calls for people saying, Time Crisis doesn't work on my TV, and you had to walk them through. And Ghost World had a playbook that you'd go through of like, this, have you tried these things? And usually it would fix their issues. Yeah.
That's funny. So what is the best way, do you think, now, you haven't done testing in a long time, so I understand. But what do you think would be the best way for somebody who wanted to start as a tester to get a job at a place like Sega or Namco?
I'm uncertain now, but I would back in the day, I'd always say try and find the temp agency that they're hiring for.
Right.
It's the thing that I've been amazed with is that QA has kind of grown as a discipline, and there's a level of art there that is beyond whatever we did. There were some definite, key things that went into it, but there's definitely a path for it. So there's multiple ways to look for it. I think you could probably just start with, hey, go to like Game Dev Map and see what game developers are in your neighborhood.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And then just reach out and be like, hey, do you have QA? Do you need someone to do QA? Like there's smaller developers that are always looking for teams that are people that need to be embedded with the team. But if you want to work for like someone like Sega or Sony, back in the day, they would only hire temps mostly, and getting a permanent position was hard. And the temps would work for like 9 months, and then you might get, then you have to take like a 3-month break. You might get hired back. So for a while there, you'd bounce between like working at Sega as a temp, and then you go over to Sony as a temp, and then you come back again. So those things happen. Like I even was temp at Sony for a bit as well during that time.
What did you temp on for Sony?
Oh God, I don't remember. It was like King of Fighters and something else. I think I played an early build of Crash Bandicoot. I remember seeing like the early build of Abe's Odyssey, and my mind was blown with what that was going to be. So things of that, yeah.
Nice. All right. So how did you make the jump from testing to game design?
I've always described Sega as the high school of the industry, because everyone I knew from there just branched out into various, game companies. I knew people that went to Acclaim, folks that went to Ubisoft, or even Crystal Dynamics. So one of the testers I had worked with had moved over to Cyclone Studios and had said, hey, we've got a game design position, you should apply. And I was like, sounds great, what's game design? And I applied, and I got my first job working on Uprising X, and I had no idea how I got the job. There was like one other tester that was there who was actually a level designer who had worked on their PC project for Uprising. And I think that was kind of, somewhat of a familiarity. And, that was my first foray into it.
Nice. And what kind of design were you doing? Because I know that when you were working on the Army Men games, you were doing level layout. Is that kind of where you started, just designing levels and
Yep.
doing that? Or
yeah, it was very much an entry-level position. Like I think in the early days, since there was no one level design engine, everyone had these proprietary engines. They're like, look, we need people to come in and create content. So the first game I worked on at Cyclone was the Uprising X, which was, essentially this height map terrain editor. You just push and pull points up to make rolling hills and try and make valleys. And so I just created levels. I had no idea what I was doing, but I was like, this sounds fun. Let's make it happen. And you make some missteps there. You make some good things, you make some bad things, and then apply that to both the Army Men games I was working on, just trying to refine what a level was, and start looking at things and saying, oh, when you have 5 level designers, they tend to make things differently. And you're like, does this really make sense? Why is this wall look like I can't go over it, but this one is lower and I can't go over it? Like, how do we find some consistency? So you start talking with people, like, how do we build rules here to make sure that when players are playing it, they understand what is a path, and that was kind of when I started to realize what game design was a little bit more, was that particular aspect.
What was kind of the moment or the level that you were working on where you really feel like, oh, now I actually understand that I'm building a level and not just placing things?
I think it was probably my first Army Men level, because it was the first time I had really thought about a theme, and I thought it was clever, because you think all your ideas in the beginning are clever. But there was a level where we had this picnic blanket, and it had like the evil army's base on it. And I was like, what if you took some food and dropped it in the middle of this base? Right now,
Sure.
And ants start overrunning the base. I said, this is the theme, right? Food and your little helicopter. If you can pick up things and drop it in the bases, you can now make the enemies or the AI of the map do the work for you. And I thought that was clever. And I was like, this is where you're telling a story. You're utilizing the environment to kind of think about what would you do in these particular places. And that's what really level design is about. It's like, how can you take the mechanics that you have in game, but also build a narrative on top of it that makes sense, and a metaphor that can really empower what you're doing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's having that metaphor helps the player understand. You can make the most ridiculous stuff. Hey, I'm hella lifting an apple, but still, it makes sense if it's in context and you understand. Yeah, I think that was a really great solution, right? Like, and you never know quite what is going to spark that, right? Like the picnic basket was the thing, obviously, that sparked that.
Yeah.
I mean, moving forward as a level designer, what are some other techniques or tips that you found to help either speed up that process or kind of help people, help you come up with really good ideas for levels?
I think a lot of it is for me, it helped when I had one of the cool things about, or not thinking about it, one of the cool things about the Army Men, or at least even the Uprising levels, is that we had a limitation on how big the map could be.
Right.
And it had to be this square, which then made you say, well, how do I maximize the use of this space, right? Are you going to snake your level through it? Are you going to make it wide open? So in that, I think putting some self-imposed constraints on the level kind of helps you define where you could work. And so that to me worked out really, really well, because then you start saying, okay, how do I utilize this space the most to try and get X amount of minutes of gameplay? And that helped kind of spawn a bunch of different ideas. Like one of them was hey, let's drop a donut in the middle of this evil base and watch these ants take over stuff. Right. But then I had another one that was a little bit more open, where it was, you could fly anywhere in the map and there was no gating, but there were ant hills around that were attacking your base, and you had to go find cherry bombs and then drop them on top of the ant hills, right? So now it's utilizing the same sort of map, but now it's utilizing the difference, and now you're trying to seek out where to go. So I think for me, it was really like, try and put some constraints on yourself, and then think about how can you maximize the theme that's within there and make something unique that you may not see in other areas.
Right. Do you ever keep track of kind of the tricks that you have? Like, do you document any sort of procedures or anything when you're making these type of games to help you like, hey, this cherry bomb level worked out really well. Maybe I could do a variant on this or something.
But you try and make note of those things, but then I also think like for me, it's very experiential. Like, how do you want to expand your level design? For Wolf of the Battlefield, I think I started to think about like, where does this play into the story? And I think those sort of things. You start taking pieces. Army Men was very much there was this light story on top, but you're really just making a bunch of levels. So each level was different than each other. So you just came up with a mission type that might make sense within the world. But like Commando 3, we had some sort of storyline that was going through it where you were these forgotten soldiers who needed to break out of a prison. And so, and then they were trying to like, stop an evil dictator from taking over this country. So in that, I really wanted my level to really feel like you're breaking out, right? So the level started off very narrow, right? Very tight hallways. But as you started to move out of the prison, and we went into a valley where I started to open things up. And I really wanted that to really feel as if, as you start moving towards freedom, you start to have a little bit more space in the level as well. So you try and cherry pick things and say, like, how do I make the player feel throughout this? And then how do I also guide them through the different areas?
No, that's a really good technique. When you were working on some of these kind of mission-based or level-based games, were you ever involved in crafting the overall narrative, or were you often given that by another, a creative director or another designer or something, and then you had to react to that?
In the early days, especially in Army Men, I had to react to that. There was, I think it was Michael Mendheim, who was the creative director at 3DO at the time, they had a huge Bible for the Army Men universe and how things could be used and how these characters played out. And so there were some constraints. But within that, almost anything goes. And at that point, it's working with the other designers and level designers to say, okay, what sort of themes are you utilizing? Are you doing some one-off stuff, or is there some things in there that I could also utilize, right? So it's playing that balance of collaborating with your other designers to figure out what are one-off unique things that are in their level versus what are things that we could also reuse, right? Some people, I think, had like bottle rockets as gates, and then you had like drop a battery on some charging pad that would make the bottle rocket take off. Great, I want to use that too, right? Like, it's already built, we can reuse these things. So it's there's times that there's story stuff and that you have to kind of put into your level, and other times it's just like you're a filler level and just come up with whatever you can.
Right. So what kind of recommendations do you have? Because particularly when people are starting early in their career, they often aren't in that position to dictate what the narrative is, and at least a lot of my students are very interested in the lore and the characters and the world, and I always kind of laugh at them and I go, enjoy it while you can while you're in school, because you're not going to get to do this when you are out making a big budget game. You've got lots of other people already doing this. But as a level designer, and as you say, and I totally agree, is that level design is storytelling. So what techniques and tips do you have for somebody how to make like the level their own, even though you're still under this kind of heavy obligation of the narrative that's being imposed upon you?
I think the best thing to kind of think about it is embrace the constraint, right? The story is there and it's written by other people who spend a whole lot of time figuring things out. It doesn't mean that you can't have an opinion. It doesn't mean you can't share things. So I think game development is collaborative. But there is a point where you need to say, this is what I have and how do I work within it? And that's the job. And that's actually kind of the fun part. It's like, once you have that story to influence what you're making, you can say, I know what my level's about and there's some themes, right? We had at Gameheads, the nonprofit I work with, we brought in Larry Charles, who's a fantastic level designer, and one of his first tips was like, I need to know the story, otherwise I'm not starting. Like, for him, it's like, this is going to inform everything, and once I know where it is, once I know what's happening from a story beat, I can start figuring out where's the story going to be told and how's it going to be told, right? And you don't always need to have that direct cinematic moment. Like, let's think about Portal, right? By having that background, you can start building that stuff into the world. Like, what sort of visual storytelling can you put in? So I think there's a level of embracing it and figuring out how to entwine it within your level perspective, so that it's telling that cohesive story as you move into it. The last thing I'll say is, like, it's when you're like in a theater play, you're not always the director, you're not always the script writer. Sometimes you're the rock, right? And you need to play your position, but you're just as important as anyone else. So you need to make sure what is your role here? What are you contributing to the overall cohesive part of it?
Right. Every part is important. There are no small parts. Yeah.
No, without you, the game would be 15 minutes shorter, right? Like think about it.
And there'd be no rocks in it.
Exactly, there'd be no rocks. But in games, it's usually a crate.
Right, exactly, or barrels. So you worked your way up. You transitioned over to Backbone Entertainment. You were senior designer, so on the Commando 3 that you mentioned earlier, and 1942, and a game called Ugly Americans Apocalypse. Oh, I can't even pronounce this.
Apocalypse Again.
Apocalypse Again. Yes. What is that? What was that one about?
Oh God, we can talk about it for a bit. So, I don't remember. Remember Spike TV? There was the game or that TV show they had where it was like different warriors from different eras who would fight, and then they'd like evaluate who won.
Oh yeah, like Viking versus Pirate or something.
Yeah, it was something like that, and I forget what it was called. It was like Unknown Warrior or whatever. Anyway, they made Pipeworks had made a fighting game off of that, and it did fairly well.
Okay.
Well, the Mucky Bucks up at Comedy Central, Spike, were like, wow, this games thing can make some money. What other properties do we have? And Comedy Central said, we have this Ugly Americans TV show. We're going to make a game about it. And it was probably the worst cash grab to work on. I'll say that now because I don't know anyone there, but it was essentially, one of these things like where we have a property, we want to make a game about it. And it flew in the face, I think, of what the themes of the show were to a certain degree. Right. The main character was like a therapist and a counselor, and he was trying to use his words to try and help people, and the people of New York, who were not just humans, but also demons and monsters and other types of things. And they put them through the ringer. And then we had this game that was a twin stick shooter, and this guy was going around shooting things. So, but we made the game work. I think the best thing about it for me is that I actually was inspired by callback Guardian Heroes, and I wanted their level up experience, and I wanted that, and I put it into that game. I was like, I'm going to make Guardian Heroes. I'm going to figure out a way to make this my own, and this is going to be the way.
I don't know what it is about treasure games, because I did the same thing with a Danny Phantom game with Ikaruga. And I was like, I want to make Ikaruga for kids. And
that's right.
And Danny Phantom, he's got white and black, and he shot white things and he shot black things, and he killed plant monsters. And yeah, it worked out great. I am still very proud of that game to this day. But yeah, Treasure Man, they are, for those of you that don't know, they're this Japanese developer. Are they still around though, or?
I don't think they're as strong as they once were. I've always looked to see if there's anything out there, but every now and again, someone does like a remaster or something. Right.
But yeah, they were for a while, at least on the Sega Genesis days, they were kind of the kings of the platform. They did like not just Gunstar Heroes and Guardian Heroes and Ikaruga and Dynamite Heady and what were some of the other ones? They always did something crazy and unusual. And they also
did a Ronald McDonald game that
they did a Ronald
everyone
McDonald,
talked about was amazing. I think did Tiny Toons too or something.
Not Global Gladiators though. It was a different one, McDonald Land or something. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they did like a DuckTales game, right?
I think it was a Tiny Toons.
It was a Tiny Toons. Okay,
I can't remember, but they did.
It was crazy, but yeah, they would mostly do these very original games, and then every so often they do these. We got to pay the bills, so let's do a IP based game. But yeah, they were the best for a while, at least in my opinion. Very, very cool developer. So speaking of cool games, you have this background in like shooters and little guys on a map type of game, and you go from that to Rock Band 3 and Dance Central 3. How was that transition?
I can say this. One of the reasons I went to Backbone is because I was leaving, or I think I just got laid off from Sony,
Okay.
and I had an opportunity, and my a colleague had got me an interview there. And I had known that Backbone had worked on a bunch of different things. Like they had just released Def Junior, and they had done a lot of GBA games. And I thought it would be a company that was small enough that I get a chance to learn how things are pitched, but also seeing that they're doing a bunch of different games, I would get to work on a bunch of different type of things.
Right.
And I was not wrong. Um, Backbone had a really good relationship with Harmonix. They had done Rock Band on PSP. They had, and we'd done a bunch of ports to different hardware on Rock Band 3. So Rock Band 3 was great because we got to go and see it early. A couple of colleagues of mine that I know before were working there, and I got to see some of the early prototypes. And you start to get in the mindset of like how are people designing things, and talking about what's important. So it was very much, and this is I think what Backbone started to become, is that we're the ones that were like, how do we make sure that we keep the spirit of a product and put it and translate it into whatever platform we're going to be putting it on.
Right. So what is the key to that? How do you keep the spirit?
For me, and thinking about like the Capcom projects we did, a lot of it is playing a crap ton of the previous projects, understanding what are sort of the key tropes within it, and then making sure that you don't lose those things. And it's whether it be a power up model, or if there's just a core tenet. Like one of the things I remember that they talked about on Dance Central was, there's certain moves where you go like this, left, and then right, but then people would actually go, right and then left, and they wouldn't get scored. Well, at that point they had said, well, I felt I was doing the spirit of the move, and that was something that was always talked about. Did I get the spirit of the move? And so they had to, adjust the machine learning to make sure that these things still counted. And so for me, those are the core tenets that you have. It's like, make sure that the spirit of the move is not lost, that we bias towards the player, right? And make sure that their expectations of what is the spirit of the game are not lost. So it is a lot of like reproducing things, but then finding ways to add a twist on it so that it's enhanced, right?
Oh, and maybe even putting in a little bit of padding or slop, in the way that it reacts to the player. So that way it like you said, it errs on the side of the player rather than it being so precise that you can't achieve it, right? Or it's hard to achieve.
Like there were some, like in Dance Central, there was a bunch of different, prototypes that we had done, and people were like, hey, we want to do, take some classic games of like Concentration or Tic-Tac-Toe, and then we're gonna do these dance games where you have to capture the card. It would flip over and it'd show you something, and then you have to do another dance number over here to unflip this card and see if they match, and then you get the points for it. What we learned is that's way too much thinking, right? You start thinking like, hey, it's 3, we can start upping the ante, but the reality is there's certain expectations. And so you want to try and find that balance between adding a little bit more complexity to it, to the levels, to the interactions, but also not lose the spirit of people feeling like they've mastered a thing.
Right. Well, I mean, this is a trap that game designers can sometimes fall into, where either we get a little complacent or bored with the things we're working on, so then we introduce these new features to try to, I think more often than not, break up the novelty, make it more novel for us than really for the player, right?
Right.
We're thinking more about our working on it experience rather than what the player is experiencing. How do you either coach someone, like if you see this happening with a junior level designer, or even yourself, how do you avoid that trap?
I like to think about this as group, right? Like what I've done in the past is like, hey, especially with level design, it's like we're all going to do level reviews together, and we're going to play through things, and we're going to comment, and we're going to figure out, does this really feel? because in some respects, I have my perspective, right? And I need to leave room that I might be faulty, right? So I don't always want to dictate what's happening, but I do want to work with people to figure out if this is a direction that we want to go in. Do we feel that this new idea has legs, or is this a one-off trap? Is this just something that we thought was cool? Because the game developers' best weapon and worst weapon is it would be cool if, right?
Right.
Once you say that, you've either got brilliance in a bottle or you've got a time suck in development, right?
Right.
So trying to figure out what it is, and then ask, does this have legs? Is there something here? And more often than not, I go with my gut. If people are mixed on it, I just make a call. Like I say, this I think is either too complex of an idea. I'm not sure this is going to be grasped. And if you want to prove me wrong, then I'm like, look, find ways to play test it. Find ways to show me that this isn't going to have the challenges that you're going to have. Because I think we tend to think that we have the best idea, but at the end of the day, we're making games for players, and they're the ones that need to be able to tell us whether or not they understand or grok something.
Right. Well, I think again, you're bringing up an interesting point, which is this idea that the game designers have the best ideas, and again, I think this might be another trap that sometimes we fall into, because I think it's less of a trap and more of we feel like we are the ones responsible for coming up with those good ideas, right? Because we have this title of game designer or creative director or lead or whatever. How do you fight against that urge, and also how do you communicate to your coworkers that it's okay for them to also be creative?
I try and build that in right from the get-go. Like for me, it's like, look, I try and make spaces for where there's creativity. I'll say, hey, here's some guardrails. We know the player has to use these weapons. We know that these are the things they need to utilize. But here's a particular problem space that we have. People are relying on one weapon and not the 4 that we have. How do we break that out? And try and solicit ideas. Try and not just leave it to the designers. Try and actually ask some engineers or some artists. Everyone has ideas, and they're definitely willing to come to you with them. One of the best ideas that I think we had in the Commando 3 game is one of the artists was like, we had every time you're killing somebody, we're increasing a multiplier, right? And then when you got hit, the multiplier would go away, right? And the artist put in like these numbers that went over the head, and I thought this was great. And I was like, the system's working. And then this person was like, the artist was like, you know what? We need a way to say, hey, you've lost this. Because I got like to the max multiplier and I was feeling really cool. And then I got hit and freaking started cussing. He goes, I want to put in expletives above the head, just like a comic book. And I was like, that's brilliant. Put it in, right? My design lens is always has blind spots, right? Yeah. And there's going to be people who come with ideas, and you want to listen to them. You want to figure out, how can we solve a problem? And if you can give them the problem space, people are very creative to help you fill it.
Yeah, that's good. That sounds like an awesome solution. So after you were at Backbone for a long time, 11 years. That's a long stretch for the game industry.
11 years? I don't think it was.
That's what your resume says. So
no, my resume's
maybe
a
your
lie.
resume's lying.
No, it's a lie. Right. I need to fix that.
Well, anyway, you moved on to Kixeye. How do you pronounce that? Kixeye, which was so a lot of the things that you mentioned that you worked on, or the way that you describe your interaction with that job at Kixeye, is now I noticed the language changed severely. And I also looked at the date and I went, oh, that's 2012. That makes a lot of sense, right? And it's a lot of language like, I'm quoting directly here from your resume. It says,
God, please.
Designed and organizes the tutorial sequence, resulting in a 15% increase in D7 retention. And then you have another one here that says, initiated matchmaking algorithm change, reducing Glicko 2 score disparity between competing teams. So, I mean, all right, I've been designing games for a long time, and this language sounds a little different than what I'm used to as game design. So was this something that it sounds like this mentality of something changed, right? Like something changed within the industry, something changed within the job. Go ahead, just because I wasn't there. I was busy doing other things. So I never got to experience this part of the industry. Please explain to me what happened in the industry to like all of a sudden make everything about retention and Glico 2 scores and things like that.
Yeah, let me try and give you the best context I have. I worked at Sony, first party, made like, a big first party game. Then the game didn't do well enough. They killed that team. I went over to Backbone, thought it was gonna be great. It was a small studio. We got to work on a bunch of different ideas, but that was also during the recession.
Yeah.
Right? And so work started to dry up and we weren't putting out as much content. So I stayed there for a very long time. But in that time, Backbone you could describe was like a middle of the road developer, right? Mid-tier.
Right.
And we were doing a lot of work for higher titles. Well, during the recession, that stuff started to dry up because the only thing you had winning, and still kind of to this day, was either indie titles or big budget, Call of Duties and Assassin's Creed sort of things.
Right.
And so a lot of the studios that were in the Bay Area, just that were middle tier, went away. And this was the time where Lucas disappeared, and
Yep.
I think Namco development went away at that point, right? It was like just things were going away, and Crystal was like one of the few studios that was left. So at that point, then all of a sudden, free to play started to kick in. Facebook games were really big. Zynga was, off the charts, and so we started to move into this world of metrics is king. And when I went to Kixeye, they were very much a Facebook company. A lot of their money was made on Facebook, and we were working on MOBA. And when I left there, I was like, I need to make Scene marketable. So that's when you start thinking, well, how can I prove that I had an impact, in some sort of metric land? So these sort of things like retention and D7 and how do we improve the matchmaking scores? That's how that got on my resume.
Well, explain what D7 is for those that might not know.
D7 is when somebody comes in on the first time playing a game, we check to see if they're back 7 days later.
Right.
And like when you have X number of people on the first day, how many of those have come back on the 7th day, right? And ideally you've got like different metrics between D7 or day 14, day 30, all these things, and you want to try and have that retention number not degrade or decline over time, hopefully.
Right, because if they leave, then they're not going to be spending the time and seeing the ads, or even better, buying the microtransactions and all that.
Exactly.
How do you keep players playing?
It varies, right? Some of it is add more content. Some of it is illuminate some of the mechanics earlier. Some of it is, especially in mobile, when you have so many instruction steps, it's like you're looking at like, what is the tutorial? Because with mobile or free to play, you've got maybe 10 seconds to grab their attention.
Right.
It's like, how much am I being brought into the game? In that respect, it's kind of like an arcade game, right? Like earlier days, if you can't grab somebody within the first 30 seconds, they're not going to put in another quarter.
Right.
So in that, it's really looking at like, where are people dropping off? Is there particular tutorial steps that are bad? Let's remove a step. Does that improve retention? Does that get them into the game? Where are they dropping off? Is there a difficulties curve? Are people dying too early? Are they not dying early enough and they're just burning through your content? So there's no one simple solution to it all, but it's really about, this is the one thing that's great and horrible about games today, is that you can see how your people are moving through your product.
Right.
And then from that, you can make decisions like, okay, does this need to be dialed up or down? Like, I think you saw this even, I heard this, Naughty Dog did this early in, like, I think the early Jackson Daxters, when they had people play testing, they would do a heat map of where people were dying.
Yeah.
And from that, you can still say, all right, this is probably too hard. It allows you to just get an idea of where are people falling, people were dying. Do we need to make this part easier, softer? So I think these things can apply not just in free to play, but also in more traditional games as well.
Right. So, I mean, and to that point, the heat map is a really good test particularly in terms of determining difficulty. How, what kind of techniques though have you employed to promote success in the player? Because this is something that I think still game designers struggle with, is this idea of the difference between difficulty and challenge. And difficult is something that punishes players, where challenge is something that rewards. And it sounds like you are very squarely in the reward the player camp. So what do you look for, like in a, as you're making your game, to help enable the player to succeed?
I think there's a couple different things, right? There's the simple thing, like how quickly are people losing? What is your lose condition, and understand that, right? And then how do you put buffers into to slow down that loss cycle? Like thinking like Rise to Honor, one of the problems I think we have with that game is that the interaction between combat with the stick and how quickly enemies came upon you was hard for people. So you're trying to figure out, like, how do you soften these things? How many tells, like how much anticipation can you put into attacks? Like how can you tell people that something bad is going to happen and they need to react to it? So I think it's finding out what is the loss vector, and then how do you put padding that is in front of that so that players can recognize that this is going to be either bad for them or not. So trying to that's one side. Then on the other side is, have you done enough instruction to tell them how you want them to play? Because there's how you want a person to play, and then there's how they actually play it. Right. And that is the job, is like, because you will play a game a particular way. Rise to Honor is a great example of this. I was like, I know exactly how to beat all these guys. This is really simple. I don't understand why any of the people, and they're like, this doesn't play the way I think it should. And I think if we'd spent more time saying, this is how we expect you to play, or even designing in bonuses for playing it correctly, people then start to look for that feedback loop of like, okay, I want this to happen. I see what you're teaching me and I'm getting rewarded for it.
Yeah, I think there's always that conflict of player expectation versus reality. And the further you kind of stray from that expectation, this is where you start. It's almost like they're bumping their heads against it, right? They're like, I think it's supposed to be this. I think it's supposed to be this, right? It makes sense that it's this. And if you don't do that, that's when they drop off or leave the game. That's, I mean, particularly in the mobile world, that was the worst thing that could happen, right? Is that you have, you lose a loser, or you lose your player base. And so, yeah, I mean, that's, I think us as a industry still needs to do better, right? We're still learning how to communicate what we want the player to do, what we expect them to do. Now, do you think that there's maybe a desire by the designers to not baby the player? Do you think that, like, why is it? Like, why are we still not doing a good job with this? The industry has been around since the 70s. Now, granted, it's made monumental leaps in terms of interaction and gameplay and styles of games. But why was it that Pac-Man did a better job onboarding a player than Call of Duty does?
Well, I think, if you're gonna think about Pac-Man, like Pac-Man starts off really slow, right?
Yeah.
It allows you for quick success,
Yep.
right? But by later levels, it is lightning fast reflexes, right?
Yeah.
There's a flow that you get into. You go back to the old flow concepts.
Yep.
And I think what we're finding is that I think when we were cutting our teeth, we had gone from the early Genesis one-hit kill, fall in a pit and die days to, no, we need to cuddle the player. We need to onboard them. We need to give them more paths to success. And Nintendo's really great about this, right?
Right. Yeah.
And I think that's good, and then you start seeing these speed runners, like, and that's where people get their kicks and their challenges. But now we're kind of finding that other side where you have games like Spelunky, you have games like Dark Souls, or Ninja Gaiden, where it is like split-second decisions. Death is part of the gameplay, and that you need to hone and be refined. And so I think what we're finding is that there is space for all of it, but I think there needs to be just more instruction in setting of expectation of what is the experience you're going to have, right? I think the problem with Call of Duties and things like that is that they're very much built on the base understanding of the historical context of games. If you're playing Call of Duty today, more than likely you're coming from years of playing Call of Duty before. So there's a base level of expectation that we expect you to come into, right? And I felt this even like with, I think in some of the later Uncharted games, I think there was an expectation that you need to be at a certain level of skill when you first get dropped in. And it's not necessarily that way.
Yeah, there's an old saying in comic books, which is every issue is somebody's first issue. And I think that you're absolutely right. I think that there's certain game, particularly series, that are like, well, you had to have played Uncharted 1 and 2 and 3 in order to play 4. And on one hand, like as an experienced player of those games, there's kind of a muscle memory. Like I remember playing Uncharted 4 or The Last of Us 2 or whatever, and my hands, and I kind of went, oh yeah, I kind of remember how this worked, you know, or Red Dead Redemption 2 or something, right?
Yep.
Like my hands remembered after a little while. It was like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to move this way and that way, and you know, and that. But I think that you're right that that's an unfair expectation to put on players. But then again, you know, if you're making a 4 or a 5 or a 7 or whatever, you know, I don't know what the longest, I wonder what the longest game series, like in terms of numbers, is.
Civ.
Do you think so, Civ? What's Civ up to?
I can't remember, but it's a lot.
Or maybe Final Fantasy, right? Like that's up to
Final
14
Fantasy.
or something like that,
14.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, we haven't hit 20s, I don't think, yet on anybody, but maybe Madden, actually. Madden every year, right? That's a lot of games. But anyway, the point that I'm getting at is that I don't now I'm not a big sports game player, so maybe Madden does this, and if they do, then awesome, more power to them. But I wonder if Madden treats every game like a brand new thing, like a refresh, or do they build on those older titles?
Some games I think do, some games don't. I was playing, I think I jumped into Stellaris the other day. One of the first questions they ask you is like, have you played Stellaris before?
Right.
And that's your difficulty setting. It's like, let's pick this setting if you've never played before, right? We're either going to do more tutorialization or we're going to make it a little easier, or pick this setting if you're a seasoned player. So I think there's a lot of games that are giving that option. But as a designer, I'm just in the headspace of I'm going to pick the default because this is what you wanted me to play. Like this is the curated experience. This is where you think I'm supposed to be. So I look at it through that lens.
But how do you feel in a game experience where maybe you're playing at a certain level and you're maybe not performing as well as you thought you would, and then the game says, hey, Marcus, do you want to go down to the easy level?
Oh,
like
I want to punch it.
Yeah, so you want to punch it, right? You're like, don't insult me. I'm I can do good, right?
I had that happen in, I think it was Uncharted 3. Like I got in some section where I was just getting worked and I was so upset and I was raging. And I think on like the 4th death, it just fast forwarded me. And I was like, wait, what happened? And to me, that was the mindset that they had set it at a particular difficulty and they knew it was a problem. And the way for them to fix it was to just push you forward.
Right.
And why I understood from a big blockbuster level that they wanted to get people to feel like they completed the game. Right. It was somewhat frustrating to me because I wanted to play that. And it can be insulting, but I think needs to be, as long as there's a little bit more curation of saying, like, look, I either want assistance or I don't. I think that's allowed.
Right. Let's jump forward. You worked at Glue Mobile, making lots of different games there, and then at Limbic. So this, again, more mobile gaming. What kind of transition as a game creator did you feel you had to make? Well, you had already been doing stuff at Kixeye anyway, but like, what's that transition like? From going from AAA, to mobile. Like, did you encounter any sort of design learning curve, or did you find it was pretty easy to get into?
No, it's all new. You know, like you and I, we're not traditionally trained, right?
Right.
So every spot was completely new, and so you're learning something. And as I like to say, I've never made the same game twice, right? So every game that I worked on was a completely new experience. And like Zombie Gunship Survival, I think was probably the one that I really started to get a little bit more understanding of what the behemoth of live ops was like. Because we had a game that was out and we had players, and I was on the forums every day trying to figure out what they liked. And when you made a change that they didn't like, oh boy, they were going to let you know, right? And you could respond in real time, say, we made it bad, we're going to make it good, and we're going to compensate you in this way.
Right.
So in that respect, it's when you get to a mobile game, where especially live ops, at that point you're a shopkeeper, you're a restaurant owner, and you're listening to people, and when you make a bad meal, they're going to let you know.
Right.
And you have to make it right.
I mean, that's fascinating and it's great, but why, games didn't have to do this before. Why now? Like, why do we have to do this? Like, why is it important to cater to that live audience when we could just say, here's a game, shut up and enjoy it?
Well, these games are not one-offs anymore. I mean,
Right.
there are some, right? But when you're building, I mean, it's in the colloquial name now, games as a service.
Right. Yeah.
You're making an experience that people want to play, not just now, but for years to come. And Kixeye had this with their game Battle Pirates. And I think there's people still playing Battle Pirates today, and that game's got to be 6-7 years old.
Right.
And when you have a rabid player base, there's a symbiotic relationship. They're paying you to make a thing, but they're paying you to make something that will be balanced. So you don't necessarily want to spoil the meal by making it too heavy in one particular thing, right? You want to actually try and find ways to keep the game interesting, but also balanced in a way that they're not running through content too fast, or there still has the same level of complexity that they had 2 months ago.
Right.
So there's this symbiotic relationship, and I think we need to make sure that we are servicing a player, right? And you're going to be servicing them over time, so you want to make sure that you have a good relationship with them.
How do you balance servicing that longer term player with the new player you're also trying to attract at the same time?
That's the hard piece. So I think about when I was at NYFA, I came in there and they had a product that was probably a year old and was really, really doing really, really well. But there was a level of balance amongst the content that wasn't there. And I started looking at it and I was like, all right, it's obvious that the entry level players and entry level characters that you get can't compete at the higher levels. And I think this was the same sort of issue that I had with Battle Pirates when I started working on that. And in my mind, it's like, you need to think about who is the free to play player. You need to think about what is the entry level experience. And ideally you want them to graduate into stuff. But if a player is willing to say, this is my hammer, I love my hammer, or this is my rifle, there are many like it, but this one's mine and I want to just work with it, let them have it. You monetize the variety, you monetize the complexity, right? So if they want to have different experiences, let them pay for it. But if they want to just stick with this one horse, let them, because they're also helping feed the people who are playing. Right. So for me, it's about making sure that your entry level stuff is somewhat viable well into the later game. That might be controversial for some, but I do think it's important to kind of have that path.
Right. Do you find that there's one flavor of, these monetization that is usually more appealing than others, or is it very wildly game to game?
It's game to game, but I do think it's the dynamic still stands. You're going to have your whales and you're going to have your free to play players. Your whales are the ones you want to try and keep happy because they're kind of the ones subsidizing the game for everyone else. But at the same time, you need to make sure that the game is still not a pay to win scenario, at least in most games. Like if you go to China, it seems like pay to win is a thing, right? But Here, you want to try and have a thing that seems balanced, that anyone can win. And so it's finding that, striking that balance of value where someone who is a high-end player wants to pay for either cosmetics or some unique skill set that you may not see with people who are free, but also having some tactics of that work in free to play. Um, I remember that GDC talk with the Clash Royale guys where they were saying, like when they got to the tournament and they're the highest level tournament players, you had these people who came in with their, pay to win decks, or they powered all these things up. And the person who won it used like a free to play, like all the basic units.
Right.
And that was something they prided themselves on. They made sure that everything still worked, that there was a level of balance in there. And that ended up being a deck type that was still really good in everyday play. And I think there's some value to that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that that translates well to all types of games, right? Think of, collectible card games and miniatures games like Warhammer and things like that, right? You can spend all this money on these very expensive units, and yet like you don't ever want to feel like something you bought has become obsolete, right? I think
Yeah.
that that's a really good strategy and a good thing to remember, right? So you're always like, the base thing always has to be good.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. No, that's great. That's a great lesson. So from mobile, concurrently with all of this, you also get involved with Game Heads, which
Yeah.
is a school that is in where you live in Oakland, California, and you are developing and still teaching, right? The
Yep.
curriculum.
Yep.
What do you teach, and why is it important for somebody to get an education in game design?
The nonprofit I work with is called Game Heads. We work with youth of color and low-income youth within the Oakland area. Although since the pandemic, we've expanded nationally.
Yeah.
But the way we saw it, and my wife and I had gotten a lead, or was asked to come meet with the executive director, Damon Packwood, and he said he wanted to start this program. He had been working with students, trying to teach them how to build websites, but somehow they were more interested in games, right?
Go figure.
Exactly. And I think he used to write for VentureBeat or something. So he had a background in game development, or just games, right?
Right.
So he started teaching them game design in his free time. And he saw that there was much more interest in it. And my wife and I have always tried to give back to the game industry, or just to the to people, to public in general. Like, we've volunteered at Black Girls Code and some other areas, and just wanted to just make sure that we're always helping around us. And this opportunity came, and we started talking with Damon about the program and what he wanted to do. And we just said, hey, here's what we think would be good. And Damon was like, hey, we meet every Saturday. And I said, all right, I'll just come by one day. And then I came back the following weekend. And I came back the weekend after that. And before I knew it, I was like, we need to start teaching more classes, or I'm going to teach some stuff. And then I was like, Damon was like, we should get some mentors. I said, great, I've got a network. And I put on Facebook, I need mentors. And before I know it, the program's getting bigger. So game development, for me, I see it as how I've made my career and built my life. And having tech, I think, and having that access to tech, I think, is a lifelong lesson and opportunity that I think should be shared with more. And I've always said this, as when I've been in the game industry, I've been one of two Black people on the team.
Right.
And so I've always wanted to see more people who look like me. And if I didn't get involved with a program like this, I probably wouldn't see more people like me. So it's really about trying to grow, the next great CEO who might be a woman, might be Latino, might be LGBTQA, like whatever. And this is what we're really trying to push. And we really want to just give opportunities for new narratives and new perspectives. And I know game design on some level, and I use your class or your instructions. Like every year I'm like, if you're not reading the platformer primer, we're not talking. You need to start to do this first, right? You know, I actually brought up your boss design talk a couple times too, right? Like I'm using everything I learned from people around me to just give that information out.
That's great. And it sounds like a great program, not just because you're using my material to teach. So, I mean, you hit on some really important things, which is the fact that the industry is still going through this kind of growing pains and still is, you know, a majority Caucasian developers and white male, you know, and but do you have any thoughts on how the industry can be more inclusive?
I think the industry's trying. And right now, I think what we've been asking is to not just say we're hiring and we're open to all opportunities. This is a pipeline problem, right? If you're saying you can't find candidates, well, are you training candidates?
Right, right.
You know, reach out to different schools. You know, there's many predominantly Black, historically Black colleges out there that you can have partnerships with. There are schools and universities that probably have higher Latino populations. You can reach out to those. There's ways to build the network, right? And it isn't, you're gonna have to do a little bit more work.
Yeah.
We're seeing it happen. You know, there's certain partners that we're working with, I think, that are earnest and trying to see the change and be part of the change. But, you know, obviously we still have a long way to go.
Right. Yeah. No, I think you hit on a great point, right? You have to, the education is going to bring the talent. And fortunately, you know, programs like Gamesheads exist to say, look, come here and learn. And then that can eventually lead to other opportunities. So that's fantastic. Are there any, other than Gameheads, are there any resources that you, you know, groups or anything that, you know, if somebody in our audience, for example, wanted to get involved, that might be a good place for them to go?
There's always Gameheads, there's Girls Make Games, Black Girls Code. I think there's Girls Who Code. You know, there's a couple different other groups. There's Pixels in Montreal. You know, there's so many different groups and I can't think of them all right now, but I think just find a place and volunteer. I think it could be just as simple as, hey, I want to start teaching after school at my local, you know, middle school.
Right.
Yeah, it doesn't take much, right? And I think it's just being, one thing I love about the game developers is that if you ask for help, people are willing to offer it.
Oh yeah, yeah. Many years ago, I did a program at a STEM school, and I reached out to Sony, and I wasn't working for Sony at the time. I was working somewhere else. I think I was at THQ, and I said, hey, is there any way you guys could donate some, I think it was PlayStation 3s at the time. And they ended up giving me, you know, a half dozen PlayStations and little big planets that we used to build levels. And I was kind of amazed that generosity was out there. And so, yeah, I agree 100%. I think that if you want to do something like that and you're like, well, you know, I can't afford to do this myself. Yeah, reach out, because there are, I think it's a little surprising what opportunities there are, because, you know, they benefit from it too, right? They go, hey, there's a guy and he's teaching this, you know, third grade class game design, and you know, that's good for them as well as for you, and obviously great for the kids too, or whatever the type of program. It doesn't have to be little kids, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
very much so.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I'm really excited to learn more about Gameheads and that. So is there a website that might be a good place to go?
www.gameheadsoakland.org.
All right, there you go. Make it easy for us.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. So let's move on to your work in virtual reality. You in 2018, you started work with Oculus Vr. Tell us about the projects you worked on, and then again, you know, that transition, right? You go from mobile, now you're going into VR, right? What did you What did you learn during that transition?
I learned that it's hard to teach people things. Like it's a new surface, right? And I was working in uh, on the Oculus Home, which was for the PC Rift, and it's like a virtual apartment. And
Okay.
we were trying to teach people how to, what the purpose of Oculus Home was, and there's just a lot of different ways to instruct. And this then goes back to the mobile problems, like how do you grab people immediately? How do you give them the information that they think they need to have to be able to be successful in your product? So that was the biggest issue, was just like, how do we explain to them what the product is, that this is a space that you can decorate on your own, that this is a space that you'll get more items to decorate your house, if your home, if you play more games in VR. The more you're playing games, the more content you get. And then once you have that, you can now, add gateways to other people's homes. You can build your own type of stuff. You can import stuff. So a lot of it was just trying to figure out ways to onboard people. And one of the best things about working at a larger company is that they've got money to do the research. And, we went to New York and did some user research sessions, and we're asking people, what do they think? And you're getting to see the things you've built and see what works and what doesn't. And you're trying to make adjustments and just see how that impact that has on people, to their engagement. So that piece was really, really fun.
Yeah, that does. It's always great to see the actual practical application of something you've worked on, because you have a certain expectation for how it's supposed to work and how it is used. And of course, they're going to do something entirely different. Now let me ask you, the mobile, a lot of the way that mobile operates, to my understanding, is that it's meant to be experienced usually in quicker, shorter bursts, right? Like you want them to play for a little bit, and then they might go off and do something and come back, and you're looking to the play pattern seems to be return engagement. But with VR, at least in the experience that I've had working in VR, the goal is immersion, right? You're trying to get them to spend as much time as possible. So what are some methods or techniques that you've had to keep the player in this space, to get comfortable with it and want to spend time to like decorate it or whatever, but also keeping in mind there are human limitations, right? Like you can't, I don't know, have you ever tried to go more than 6 hours in VR? Because it's not, I've tried it, and it's like by the end of it you're like wasted, right? Like it's exhausting. It's almost like living your life at twice the speed. So
yeah, but your goal isn't necessarily to it's not the same level of engagement, right? When you have this home, you're really thinking about how do you it's a comfort thing. Like when you're decorating, think of like how you feel when you're in Animal Crossing, right? Like it's personal taste, right? So at that point, you're just trying to give people content that might match with their aesthetic and their own personal feelings on things. So it's really about trying to make sure that you have enough of a selection that matters to that particular person, so that they can kind of feel like they can construct stuff. And you have some people who are very much the creators. They will take this random flat rock, turn it on its side, and then all of a sudden they're making this water feature, right? Like they're just making all types of walls out of stuff, right, by placing thousands of these around. And so you don't know what you're going to get. And I think there's a level of you're playing into the player's creativity and expression, and you want to give them enough tools for them to kind of just let their mind wander. And with that, you're really just trying to build a space that isn't too small, but also feels like it's aspirational. And a lot of the Rift homes, you're in this, what we used to call it colloquially, a sky prison, because it's 3 walls, but then on one wall, it's just opened out into a vista.
right.
So it always feels like you're in either a mountainside or off in space, or maybe some like a cyber city of some sort. So it's always interesting. Of course, my dog is here with his ball.
Squeaky toy, yeah. With that in mind, I mean, with VR, that environment can be literally anything, and it could be as big or as small as possible, right? Like literally anything is possible in virtual reality. What have you found that there's a threshold to what the player kind of wants or feels comfortable in, or like do you say you have the sky prison, that obviously to me denotes some sort of limitation to what they have to work with.
No, not necessarily. Like, I think one of the things that we found was that was just a stylistic choice for that particular, for our initial homes, right? Like
Okay.
this was to build and have a certain level of fidelity, to put, some level of constraints there. But as we started to wrap up the project, we also enabled the ability for people to import their own custom homes, right? You can import a model, a GLB, and just, it could be anything. And at that point, the limitation is the memory size and a certain footprint. But we had people who built large countrysides with like towers in them. You could go up inside the tower. So at that point, the limitation was whatever you wanted to build. We had our own guidelines because we wanted to create a space that we felt comfortable, which isn't like too tight, but also has a cozy feel. Is there science to that? Yes and no, right? Much like games, there's not necessarily a science, but there are some guidelines that we had, and we tried to follow those.
Did you ever find that the audience really requested something that you guys then said, oh, we have to add this in, that was kind of unusual or interesting?
No, typically it's like, why can't I do this? Like, it's like, why am I teleporting? Why can't I walk? All right, cool. Let's put in a walk function. It's most of those highly requested things. Some of them were hard to do. Some of them required a little bit more work. I can't speak to all of them, but but where we could, and based on our scope, we could do it.
Right. So, VR has kind of undergone a bit of a bumpy, through the pandemic. It's been, on one hand, it's been great for VR, but on the other hand, like a lot of the big companies had some problems. I think of Magic Leap, for example, which, kind of promised this pretty amazing VR experience. And, I think they're pivoting towards medical and insurance, but simulations and things like that. And, Oculus 2 is coming up, right? Isn't there, aren't you guys doing or not Oculus? What's the other one?
We have a Quest.
Oh, Quest, right. Yeah. Yeah. So where do you see VR going? Like what's the future of VR?
I can't speak to that in a whole lot of ways.
Right. All right.
I will say that the Oculus Quest is very successful. It's a great price point. It's kind of made it much more accessible for people.
Right.
And in that, we're going to start seeing a lot more ideas and new products coming out. And I think really what it's going to come down to is really about making sure that creators can easily make stuff for VR to kind of push the medium. And I think that's where we're at. Like if you start thinking about even like you think about indie games, they're always pushing the medium forward, right? And we're going to have the same sort of tact here, right? At some point, you're going to have someone make something that you haven't quite seen before. So there's always new things on the horizon, and I'm excited to see what might happen in VR moving forward.
So for a developer, like an indie developer who is interested in creating content for, the Oculus Quest or just VR in general, what advice do you have for them? Or is there maybe things that you feel that they should be familiar with that will help them create better VR experiences?
It'll be the same thing that I would give to any developer. play lots of VR games.
Which
Utilize.
which ones should we play?
I mean, well, I'm not going to say Beat Saber because everyone's playing that, right? But you know, Alex has kind of pushed the medium.
Right.
Half-Life Alex, like you definitely have to play that.
Yeah.
There's other things like Dead and Buried, and Moss is on the other end.
Oh, right.
You know, there's some other titles that are eluding me right now, but the point is there's plenty of things out there, right? And you want to play them now, and see what is possible. And then, you know, it's the same sort of things. If you want to jump right in, you've got engines like Unity and Unreal that can help you jumpstart into VR. And there's a specific type of coding and stuff that goes along with it. So it's you're gonna have to rely a lot on the internet and forums to kind of understand best practices.
But fortunately, there's a lot of resources out there.
Very
for
much so.
developers. Yeah. Are there any trends in VR that you feel like you want to avoid? Like, you know, how certain fashion, you know, games are like fashion, right? Things kind of come and go. Is there anything that you're like, if you're making that, don't, you know, maybe you should think about something else?
I don't want to call anyone out, but you know, there are certain things that you start to see, because when you see someone do it well, there's always these fast follows, right? And you see that in games as well.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of like
Flappy this and Flappy that.
Yeah. So, you know, there's a lot of on the rails sort of like hit this target sort of thing. And I don't want to call it any specific title as being that, but I do see that as being kind of like this, your entry level into VR, you know, flying through space, whack this thing, you know, whack these things that are coming to you in some sort of sequence. Beat Saber has kind of done that. And there's other things that have kind of cribbed off that. And I think there's a lot of spaces to iterate and within that space, but I think VR has a lot of potential. You know, the other game that I forgot about is, like, you know, the Jesse Shell game. I Expect You to Die. Like, it's a puzzle game. It's very cool, and it's getting you to think about how can you utilize VR in unique ways.
Right. What is there any sort of VR experience that you particularly like that maybe is not particularly conventional?
Right now, yeah. Well, there's so many things, right? I'm gonna go with I Expect You to Die right now, because to me that's very much a storyline experience that I think is just clever. Right.
Yeah, locks you into a very specific location, so it solves that problem of movement that everybody is always dealing with, and it's got a sense of humor, but it also is, you feel a little bit of peril. Yeah, I mean, Jesse's
those are the sort of things I like to play, right? You know, very story based, and so that's somewhat biased of an experience.
No, it's okay. I mean, you know, it's all right to have biases, I think. I'm gonna open the floor up to we've got some questions, so I'm gonna read them off. So DC asks, Marcus, thanks for speaking with us. Do you think party games will break out in VR?
Yes. Like, I think, like, the thing that's great about VR is that you can have crazy input sort of things and crazy expressions. Like, Space Team is in there.
Oh yeah.
Right. And that's like a fabulous expression. You know, if you think about Job Simulator and like what sort of crazy interactions are there, now put that into a Mario Party sort of aspect. I think the key component here is getting enough people to have VR headsets and want to play in a party atmosphere.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing that I feel is still missing from VR is that couch experience, right? That we all grew up with, you know, Smash Brothers and Mario Kart and all that.
That's one of the best things about VR. When you start getting connected, you can feel like you're in the same room.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I normally don't play with other people. I find them annoying. No. So Lupien asks, are there any I'm sorry, oops, that was not the question I wanted to read. Here we go. Lupien says, I'm working on my first indie game. I show it to my mom and she likes it. But I think she's telling me what I want to hear because she loves me. Yes, Lupin, your mom is telling you they like their game because they love you. How can I measure and improve the fun when I don't have telemetry infrastructure such as retention, heat maps, and things like that. Like what can a new or indie dev use to help them gauge those types of different statistics?
There's various ways. Like, and I think your tried and true play test is always a thing.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Live
if
pay test.
if you're in a school, bring it to school, right? Get random people to play it. Go to your cafeteria if you're in college and say, would you be willing to play this for 5 minutes? If you have a local game store, which maybe not now in the pandemic, but if you have a place where people congregate that are around games, ask them to play. Find meetups or any sort of development community for developers and just try and seek feedback there. I think you don't need all the heat maps because you may not have those numbers. And especially when you're an indie developer, you want to really spend time leaning on your friends and people around you to give you that lens that you may not have.
Right.
And find the feedback where you can. And you don't always have to listen to people. That's part of the creative control. You need to decide what is good feedback and what's not.
Right. Yeah. Oh, that's a very important lesson, right? Like, even though people's opinions are important, some are more important than others. And I don't just mean that from it's your boss or something like that, but there's just some that are better answers and better feedback to help you.
Yep.
Well, thanks for the question, Lupian. Let's see. Andy has a great question, which is, hi, Marcus, have you found any difficulty going from being a generalist to an employment world that seems to want specialists?
Yes. That's my answer. Yes. It is difficult. And I think the life lesson here is always be learning the next new thing. Right. Like, whether it's scripting, whether it's what is the new level design tool or working in Maya, I think it's make space to continue to be learning. There are certain principles that still are tried and true, but there are certain skill sets that need to be there. And what I've found as the industry has become more business driven, not completely business driven, but more business driven, you're finding that people are looking for a level of craft, whether it be in spreadsheets, whether it be in math and economy design, whether it be in architecture and level design, whatever it might be. I think, but find your love, own it, and find a place that loves you for it.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. Ishan asks, what criticisms would you address to the current condition of the gaming industry? And I assume what Ishan means is maybe what's going on at like Activision, Blizzard, and things like that.
Was it somebody had said this? It was either Van Jones or Questlove. Like after the election of 2016, they said this is a bad pill that America's just gonna have to swallow. Same thing with the game industry. It's good medicine, but it's gonna suck. Yeah. And I'm totally okay with everything that's happening right now. Not in that it's happened, but more that things are coming to light, right. And that we are hopefully not going to. And there's a culture within games where people fail upwards.
Yeah.
And if there's a way that we can find a way to remove the toxic elements while still making space for others, I think we will see the change we want to see. So, and the way that I'm doing it is like with game heads. The more that I'm training people and giving them a lens for what needs to happen in the industry and why we're bringing them there and why we think they need to be there, and to understand that I'm giving back and that I hope they think they should also give back because this is a program we're doing it, we'll start to see that change. So I look at it as find what you can own in your circle of influence and then influence it.
Yeah, I think particularly important, and I think this is a good message for the industry, in that if you have been in the industry for a while, the best thing you can do is pass on that knowledge, right? Whether it is historical, right? Like, back when I was playing Pong, it was like this, or, these are things that I've learned, and I mean, I have kids, and the the sad truth of children is that you can tell them, don't do this, you're going to hurt yourself over and over again, but they
Yep.
still will do it, right? And so I think the advantage of maybe being in a situation where you are with someone else's kids, they listen more, right? Like I'm sure that the kids that listen to you at Gameheads, they listen to you with more attention than maybe your own friends and relatives would, right?
They do, but I always try and tell them that I am one voice.
Right.
And one of the reasons we get them mentors is because my perspective is not the only perspective. And I think you need to seek feedback from a bunch of different people to figure out what's best.
Yeah.
I take that from, I used to salsa dance a lot. And, one of the things they always do is like, they always had you switch partners.
Oh, yeah.
As you're going through the lesson. And one of the good things of doing that is you get to understand how different people give their signals and how different people dance. And
Right.
it makes you a better dancer. And I think it's the same thing with design. If you're not getting feedback from a bunch of different people, you're going to have this very narrow perspective on how things should be.
Yeah.
And that is just going to limit you in the long run.
Change partners. I think that's really good advice. All right. So I always get to ask the last question. Thank you, everybody, by the way, for your questions. Sorry we didn't get to all of them, but we only have so much time. But my question to you is, what is next for Marcus Montgomery?
What's next for me? I am going to be traveling to Europe through the pandemic at the end of the month.
Oh, stay safe.
And yeah, it's going to be great. But what's also next is Gameheads is going to have its student showcase at the end of this month.
Okay.
I think it is on August 28th. You can probably go to the Gameheads website to find out more, or follow Gameheads on Twitter. I think it's at We Are Gameheads, and find out more about it. It'll be streamed online. And if you can support there, I'm definitely going to be supporting it. And our student showcase is one of the best things because the students are spending their summer right now working to develop their own game projects. And it's usually like a 3 to 5 minute demo of a completely new idea. In the past, we had a game based on gentrification where you played a cashier in a like a small corner market. Yeah. And as the world became gentrified around you, you got to see how your neighborhood changed and who the clientele was. And then like the cash register would turn into a square. And it was just a great perspective to see sort of things. And we've had, games about superheroes. We've had games about, cats being kidnapped by frat boys, and you have to go free your cat's friends. So there's all types of things. And it's always fun to actually just see what ideas are coming out of the students.
That's great. Well, that we will definitely have to go check that out. If anybody wants to reach out to you other than the Gameheads website, where can they find you online?
You can find me on Twitter at Marcus in Games, or you can go to my website, and it's www.sleepy-genius.com.
Well, Marcus, thank you so very much. This has been wonderful. Hopefully you had a good time. I had a great time talking with you. And everybody out there, thank you so very much for joining us. It will be doing another one of these in another month with a new guest. And I look forward to seeing all of you very soon. Please keep making games and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.